think the best way I can describe what my take on things is that I started out very much, as I say, I've been a clarinetist for 40 years. I've got a practice that includes, I've played with a lot of orchestras, I've played with a lot of ensembles, I've done a lot of written music, improvised music, played in different styles. About 10 years ago I had a really exciting experience of playing with electronics for the first time in Stuttgart actually. And I got to play written pieces, but they were spatialized and involved a lot of wizardry, and I wasn't at all like many of you in this room. That's a basis point for you. I'd never done that before, and it was really exciting. Gradually, as I did it more and more, I got to the point where I found that there were things that I cared about that were not being looked after by this sort of traditional model that we might have of kind of what I call the astronaut model. I would kind of practice my stuff and then stand there on stage during the dress rehearsal and get plugged in, by lots of people running around and doing tech and plugging in microphones and cables and stuff that I knew nothing about. And there were all kinds of concerns and delays and things that were upsetting, and then there were things about the sound that I wasn't happy with, and in the end it was just me standing there doing the gig, and where was my influence? And I felt that it was important for me anyway, because I wanted to do more of this, to get more involved. So my history then, that's very brief, but just to say that when I started my doctoral studies, it was a bit unusual really for this field, but I basically didn't know what a microphone cable was. I didn't know how digital audio worked. I didn't know, one end of an XLR from another. I didn't know how to use an audio interface. So it's been a really, really steep learning curve, but I think the things that I've brought to it from the point of view of what you might call a traditional trained musician playing a traditional instrument, perhaps bring an interesting perspective. So I'm looking really at the idea of that instruments evolve, but that our practice as musicians, our creative practice, should also evolve, and is always evolving. And so that's the starting point of my little presentation. And in the electro-instrumental field, here I STEIM with that, I talk a bit about humanizing technology, bringing we kind of enable this by paying close attention to performers' established and contingent priorities. And I'll talk a bit about what those are for me, and to embodied relationships with instruments, which we've heard about quite a lot over the course of the morning. Over time, this idea of augmenting, we talk about augmenting, taking what's already there, keeping the value of what's already there, and then adding to it where we can. It becomes less about extending instruments, but I'm finding that performer agency is widened into kind of broader inhabitation of technology. Music technology includes things like these early versions of what I play. So there's a really early single reed instrument that has a reed attached to it. This is what a clarinet, the earliest clarinets looked like. This is from, the earliest clarinets were in the very early 1700s. And already there's really familiar things to me, like there's no standardization really. It's a kind of wild west out there with the clarinet. It took off very quickly and started to look like these things on the left. Different sizes, different pitches, different ways of getting round bodily problems, and different ways of making a conical bore instrument play in tune over different registers, different sets of harmonics, and making them out of different materials. The one on the right is much more like what we used to see today. That's much more like what we'd expect a clarinet to look like. On the way, we got some really interesting things, shapes and sizes. So these are basset horns, which are kind of like longer, deeper clarinets, and you can see that instrument makers are using the technology of the time to get round these are built around the idea of what the human body can do using technology, to create these things. That straight bell at the end is really interesting as well. I'm not going to talk a lot about it. This is one of my favourites. Later on today I'll be playing a bass clarinet. This is an example of what an early bass clarinet might have looked like. So to get round having a big tube that you can stretch your fingers over, instrument makers made a kind of serpentine tube so that your holes can go in the right place. And nowadays, once metal technology had advanced, we could build keys that put down. You can put your fingers down and it close several holes or open several holes that are too far away to reach. And that kind of reached, quite a big, intense period of activity in the 20th century. This is an attempt to build both a quarter-tone microtonal instrument and also to solve this solution of having there were two standard, and there still are two standard size of soprano clarinets, a B flat and an A, and this is an attempt, the one in the middle is an attempt to sort of combine those two things without having to change. But actually changing is not really a problem, so it's just kind of a tangent in history. It's much easier to pick up one instrument and play it and then change to the other than it is to do that. I think another interesting thing before I get onto the computer, Hans has already spoken very eloquently about the explosion, the fact that instruments evolved rather slowly, but that has been massively radicalized and expanded by, for example, by electronics, post-war electronics, and then by the digital era, which is really, that's why we're here. We're kind of challenging what the idea of an instrument can be. And in my case, challenging the idea of what a clarinet can be. Before I get onto that, we were talking yesterday about how instruments that are used can show us things about the user. So I took these photographs this morning because my clarinet is 23 years old and it's taken some beating. But what's really interesting is that that picture to someone who knows about clarinet technique tells you quite a lot about me. It tells you about the size of my fingers. It tells you about the shape of my hand position when I play. It tells you which notes I play more than others. It shows you that I play very kind of flat-fingered with my, I don't put my fingers very precisely on the holes. I've got very flat fingers, so it's all worn down here. Because my fingers squash right over to here, and this is all worn down here, because I've scraped along there. It shows you that I don't, because this key is quite close on my little finger, I go straight onto it, whereas on these ones I kind of swipe to the side. And it shows you that I use this and this an awful lot, but maybe not that one so much. It also shows you that my body has a kind of sweat that is quite abrasive, because not everybody's clarinet looks like that. So it's teaching you about me and my kind of physical makeup as well. So instruments, and again Hans is going to know all this, but instruments tell stories. And so we get this kind of, similarly here, you can see, and conveniently on my clarinet, the layering of the different metals and alloys that plate the keys are different colours. So you get a kind of history of my instrument by these pictures. I'm going to keep moving rapidly along because I've got some things to get through. My clarinet these days looks quite a lot like this. So I now have this whole continuation of this assemblage of technologies. And I've added a few things. So I put a hole in the instrument, and I've added a pickup mic, and I have different microphones, and I have controllers. Those are things that are familiar to you in the room. Adriana spoke as well about priorities that we have, and effortfulness and resistance. And these are things that we choose very, very carefully over instrumental practice over time, certainly over you know, the 10 or 15 years or so it takes to become professionally proficient at a traditional instrument. And then that time afterwards where you develop your own personal sound and your own personal take on what the instrument can do by choosing different repertoire and your influences and what have you. We get very particular ideas, and we talk about people having a sound, you know, so somebody can play the same instrument, but so Miles Davis has a particular sound, and Louis Armstrong had a particular sound, but those two players, even within jazz, are very, very, you know, clearly identifiable. These days, part of our sound might look like that. So that's the EQ that I use for that particular pickup mic when I play through Ableton Live. So, and that, in a way, that's telling you quite a lot. That is telling you quite a lot about my sound and my preferences, because I kind of worked that out, you know, to be a preferable thing for me. Moving through to this idea of the extended self, what do I mean by that? Well, partly, if we look at what's going on when we've got somebody playing a clarinet and a computer, we've now got an assemblage of different assemblages. So you've got, on one hand, the human, and that's very important. In terms of a wind instrument, you know, part of that instrument is in my mouth, and part of what I use to make my sound are cavities in my body and like flesh and meat. So the instrument resonates in the oral cavity inside my mouth. You don't see that. I've got sinuses, if I'm not bunged up with a cold. I've got sinuses that I'm projecting into. I've got a chest cavity here. And you can, I mean, you know, we do this with the voice. I can project my voice like this. I can change my voice by changing my oral cavity, and I can resonate my voice through the chest. And we're doing all of these things when we play wind instruments. They're just not seen at all. And then the very thing that we use in order to produce sound and express is, you know, part of our vital organs, part of our vital living system, the breath. And that can mean that also, you know, it's not only the breath as a mechanism, like perhaps as an analogy, it could be the bow. It's often used, breath and bow are often used as an analogy. Well, and the bow, you know, excuse me, but you know, you could survive without an arm, but you can't survive without breathing, you know, and part of this, the reason that that's important is that if you're not in control of your breathing, or if your breathing's not comfortable, that can put a lot of stress on you as a person, you know, as a performer. It can draw away from your attention. You can get, you know, too much oxygen or lack of oxygen to the brain. So the human's really, really important hidden thing there. The instrument, all these different bits and bobs, peripherals, by which I mean, oh God, I could go on for hours about all the little gizmos and gadgets that we use, music and things. And on the computer side of things, we're on what we would traditionally think of as the technology side of things. We've got all those things that I've listed. I don't need to go through them, you can all read. But interestingly, so we have all these little assemblages, but then we package them up together, and I think that I've started to think, instead of crushing different technologies together, it's started to feel much more, to me, like a step above all of that. And we talk about technology includes absolutely everything. We're using, as instrumentalists, we're using technology to assert a set of priorities that serve a higher purpose, and that purpose is what you touched upon, which is expression. And that's something I think that, you know, we're probably going to talk about a lot today and tomorrow. But I see instruments as filters of sound, of the sound spectrum, of timbre, but also of you know, choices that you make and influences. They're filters of your culture, your teachers, your influences, your genre choices. I've had a big text dump for you because it's a conference. Of course, you should have a text dump. These people have written very eloquently about the performer-instrument relationship, but I think I better whiz through them because we're all quite hungry. But this is what I mean by, I think it's really interesting to think of instruments and evolving those instruments on to include all the available technology of the day, to think of those not just as part of a kind of extension of the self. These guys, Riva and Mantovani, did a really interesting, very sweeping review of the idea of telepresence in gaming and objects and extended use. And I think there's this sense that we don't extend what we do by having these distal tools. We actually extend ourselves into a wider region of understanding of what we're able to do. Sorry about all the text dumps, there's one more. Owen Green, my colleague at Edinburgh, has talked a lot about relationships that are in constant flux. We must have this ongoing reassessment of the nature of our performance ecology. A coalition of resources that we use at a particular moment. And my last slide is a little quote from today I'll be doing a performance that's kind of a hybrid between my system that I play through on the bass clarinet in Ableton Live and some of the electronics of Martin Parker that I've kind of imported in. So I mean that quote is kind of where I sit. Sums up where I am at the moment with this augmented instruments. They're just instruments. It's not. We should just, that's why we're all here. They're just instruments, right? It's all technology. It's the 3-word summary of my talk. Thank you very much.